Officially, South Korea and North Korea are still at war. This is why the border between the two countries looks like this. The border between them is the most heavily guarded border in the world, with landmines and barbed wire that stretches across 250 kilometers. But the question is, how did we get here, and what does the future hold for the everyday citizen of Korea? Prior to World War II, the entire Korean peninsula was a territory of Japan. The Japanese invaded Korea in 1910 and annexed it for themselves. The Japanese ruled the Koreans for 35 years until the end of World War II, when Japan's emperor announced surrender on the 15th of August 1945. The end of war usually means the victors get to split the spoils. In Korea's case, the surrender of Japan meant the US and USSR got to partition the country. The Kim dynasty, ruled by Kim Il sung, became the de facto leader in North Korea, and Syngman Rhee became the president of South Korea. In their hated effort to disarm the Japanese army and repatriate the Japanese population in Korea, the United States and Soviet Union agreed in August 1945 to divide the country for administrative purposes at the 38th parallel. At least from the American perspective, this geographic division was a temporary expedient. However, the Soviets began a short-lived reign of terror in northern Korea that quickly politicized the division by driving thousands of refugees south. The two sides could not agree on a formula that would produce a unified Korea, and in 1947, US President Harry Truman persuaded the United Nations to assume responsibility for the country, though the US military remained nominally in control of the South until 1948. Both the South Korean National Police and the constabulary doubled in size, providing a southern security force of about 80,000 by 1947. In the meantime, Kim Il sung strengthened his control over the Communist Party in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, as well as the northern administrative structure and military forces. In early 1949, Kim Il sung pressed his case with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin that the time had come for a conventional invasion of the South. Stalin refused, concerned about the relative unpreparedness of the North Korean armed forces and about possible US involvement. In the course of the next year, the communist leadership built the KPA, the North Korean army, into a formidable offensive force modeled after the Soviet mechanized army. By 1950, the North Koreans enjoyed substantial advantages over the South in every category of equipment. After another Kim visit to Moscow in April 1950, Stalin finally approved an invasion of South Korea. In the pre-dawn hours of June 25, 1950, the North Koreans struck across the 38th parallel behind a thunderous artillery barrage, and just 3 days later were in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The North Korean army, together with the Chinese army, eventually took over Seoul and marched southwards to conquer the rest of the country. But the USA and Japan intervened and pushed back the North Korean army over the 38th parallel. By June 1951, the Korean War had reached a critical point. The Chinese North Korean armies, despite having suffered some 500,000 casualties since November of 1950, had grown to 1.2 million soldiers. The United Nations Command had taken its share of casualties of more than 100,000 since the Chinese intervention. But by May 1951, the US ground troops were numbered to be 256,000, and the South Korean army was at 500,000. Over the next 2 years, both sides of the war saw that an end was not going to be brought through military engagement, and on May 25, 1953, in Panmunjom, in a small tent, negotiators had worked out the details of an armistice. On July 9th, Rehi agreed to accept the armistice, though no representative of the South Korean army ever signed it. On July 27th, Mark Clark from the United Nations Council, Peng Duai from China, and Kim Il sung from the North Koreans signed the agreement. That very same day, the shooting stopped and the armies began the awkward process of disengagement across what would become a 4-kilometer wide DMZ or demilitarized zone. This zone was agreed by both sides to be at least 4 kilometers wide and stretch a length of 250 kilometers, where no military engagement was allowed. But since no South Korean ever signed the agreement, the war is technically still ongoing. From the decades following the war, North Korea continued to develop as a communist nation with the Kim dynasty at its head, while South Korea officially turned to a democratic nation in 1987. Both sides, though, are a coin with very different sides. In 2021, there were reports of widespread starvation in North Korea. It is estimated that 60% of the total population of North Korea live below the poverty line in 2020, while South Korea has seen economic boom with major companies like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai all headquartered in Seoul. The only advantage that North Korea has over the South is access to nuclear weapons. North Korea is one of 9 countries in the world in possession of nuclear weapons, and its leader Kim Jong-un is not afraid to display this military force. North Korea frequently fires missiles into the Sea of Japan and has prompted concerns from many countries, namely the US. On June 30th, 2019, Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un along with Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, at the DMZ and briefly crossed the border into the North Korean side of the DMZ, making him the first sitting US president to enter North Korea. Former US presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton had previously visited North Korea after they had left office. This move from President Trump was the beginning of a process to negotiate with North Korea to dismantle its nuclear arsenal in exchange for relief in economic sanctions. But of course, 6 months later, the pandemic happened in 2020 and Trump lost the elections in November. In recent times, tensions between the two countries has re-emerged, with Kim Jong-un abolishing all agencies and institutions involved with negotiations with South Korea. It seems like all previous work has been scrapped and it's back to the drawing board or back to square one. Only time will tell if the North and South will ever find peace, but best believe that we, the everyday citizen, will be here when they do. Thank you for watching.